Alrighty, everybody, we are starting with our first game design lesson. If you are watching this, hopefully you have downloaded Unity. If not, go online, look up Download Unity Hub, and just download Unity. We're using Unity 6 for this. Once you get Unity Hub downloaded, you'll have a little icon on your computer like this. You can click it, open up Unity Hub. It might look something like this. You might have a few less projects than me. I've been doing this for a little bit. But you can click New Project. You can name your project here, so maybe you say, my first 3D game, whatever, and you can save it wherever you want on your computer. I'm doing everything on Unity version 6. I'm using Universal 3D, and I'm going to click Create Project. Once I do, it's going to start creating the project. I already created a project for this. We're going to do 3D game video series. And we'll start looking at how to create beautiful 3D games in Unity. So this is our Unity editor. We have a few places to work in our Unity editor, some important windows going on. We have our hierarchy view over here on the left side. This is a list of all of our game objects. We'll look more at game objects in a moment, but game objects are just anything that exists in our game, in our levels. A game object is anything that's in our game. Something in our game is an object. Simple enough. When I click on an object, for example, this camera is an object. On the right side, I have that object's components. So this camera has a transform component. Every game object has a transform component, a camera control component, an audio listener component, and a universal additional camera data script component. These components make up what an object is. An object is comprised of its components. We'll add some objects in a second so we can get used to messing around with that. This light source has its own components. It has a transform component, a light component, some kind of light data script. Everything has components. Our game objects are defined by their components. And we can create custom components. Those are scripts. Those would be in our assets folder. So down here, we have our project folder. We have our project view with our assets folder in it. Our assets folder contains all of the files that we might put into our level. That might include audio files. It could include, honestly, videos. It'll usually include textures, like images. You could have fonts in here. You could have prefab game objects. Your animations could be in here. Your sound effects. All sorts of things could be in here. Your 3D models. All of the files that we'd be using to create our game objects in our scene would be in here. All of our files are saved in our asset folder. We'll create some files in the next video. For today, we're going to create some objects. And this is my scene view. I can hold right click to look around. I could fly around with WASD while holding right click. And right now there's not much in here, but let's add some objects. So to add objects to the game, we're going to look at the hierarchy. The hierarchy, as I mentioned, is a list of objects that are in our game, and we can click this plus button to add new objects to our game. We're going to start by adding something for us to stand on. Let's say a floor. We'll add a 3D object, plane. This is the floor. Now we have a mesh component, which just has the mesh of this object saved. The mesh is like the 3D model of the object. We have the renderer, which allows us to see the object. The renderer renders it on the screen. Rendering means to see it, to be able to visualize it. To show it on the screen is to render it. So I can see this, so it's being rendered. If I uncheck this, now it's not being rendered. I can't see the object. What I'm seeing is its collider. We'll talk more about colliders in a second once I have a second object so we can start colliding them together. But a collider allows an object to touch other colliders. Colliders allow two objects to touch. If they don't have colliders, they can't touch. We'll see that right now with our second object. Well, before we do, let's look at our component properties. Each of these components has these things inside of them. These are called the properties of this component. Every game object has a transform. The transform component has a position property. I can move this game object around by changing its position. If I look, I'm on a piece of graph paper. I have all these squares like graph paper. Let's say I was to move the center point of this object from x is 0 and probably z is 0. Let's say I was to move x up by 1. Okay, let me actually face it from this way. It might be more obvious. Okay, that moves it to the right and to the left. And we might have seen before in math class that if I move y, we can move up and down. But we're in 3D. These are coordinate points, just like math class. But unlike your high school math class that you guys have been taking, we also have a z coordinate. We're in 3D. So we can move things forward and back. That is new for 3D. So x is left and right, you should know that. 1x, if you look at my graph lines, I'm going to go over one box. 1z, I'm going to go forward one box towards me. Or I guess negative z, I'm facing it from the wrong side. It's okay. It doesn't really matter. Negative z, I can move forward towards me. One box. So it's 9 boxes. Right here is 8 boxes. Right over here is 7 boxes. Over here is 6 boxes. And the way I'm moving these is I click the letter and I drag the letter. That being said, I'm going to set my plane to the origin point. The origin point is 0, 0. When you have 2 points, when you have 3 points, it's 0, 0, 0. So this is the origin point of my world. We usually want to build things near the origin point because we start getting errors called floating point errors if you get really far away. If you've played Minecraft, you might have seen that there's like a whole weird world generation that happens when you get too far from the origin point of Minecraft. That's caused by floating point errors. We get weird errors when we get really far away from origin just because of decimal point rounding issues that we don't have to really get into too much because it won't come up, but it's good to know about. Okay, we have our first game object. We added it using the hierarchy. We're going to add a second game object. We'll add a capsule for now. We'll start giving it a little bit of physics. So I'll add a 3D object capsule. And I'm just going to move this up a little so it's above the plane. Okay, cool. So we have a capsule. And let's press play. Let's see what our capsule does right now. So we have 2 game objects. We have a capsule and a plane. Right now when I press play, nothing's happening. That's because my capsule's components are a renderer, which let me see it, a collider, which lets it touch other colliders, but it's missing a component to give it physics. The physics component in Unity is called a rigid body. To add components to a game object, you're going to select the game object you want to add a component to, in this case capsule, and you're going to click add component, and you're going to give it the name of the one you want. So I want a rigid body, so I'll search rigid body. There's also rigid body 2D, that's only for 2D. We're going to use a normal rigid body. Rigid body. I'm going to press play, and now we have physics on this object. It falls down. If I was to, for whatever reason, put another object next to it, they might bump into each other. Now they have physics. They can roll around. Maybe if I rotate this a little bit, just for funsies, maybe they'll roll around on it. Pretty cool. Okay, so we gave those objects physics. I'm going to undo all that. So this has physics. Now it falls down. Let's look at some of the physics properties really fast. We have mass. This is how heavy it is. So that's the simple way to put it. That's physics teachers don't get mad at me. But it's how heavy something is. It's how hard to move it is. So if something has a lot of mass, it's going to be really hard to push open or push or move or touch or it's going to be very, very heavy. Use gravity is pretty obvious. If I turn off use gravity, now my object is not using gravity, so it's just going to float there. But it still has physics, so maybe if you're making a space game, maybe you have objects that have physics that can bump into each other, but they have no gravity, so they float around. That could be cool. So just by altering these properties very slightly, we can get really interesting behaviors already. So I can turn off gravity. Is kinematic, just makes it so that it can't move. It locks it in place. We're not going to use that really. Collision detection is useful. We're not going to use it really. Constraints is really important. I might make a game where I'm only using two of my axes. I could freeze. A common one is for players to freeze rotation so they don't fall over. We're actually going to use this relatively soon. For now, we're not. Okay, so we looked at some components. We added a component to this. Let's actually remove the capsule collider. So I'm going to uncheck. This is now, it's not active, so there's no collider on this. It's still in there, it's just not active, so it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to disable this capsule collider. You guys take a guess. What's going to happen if my component, my capsule component, is deactivated? Let's press play and try it. With no collider, this object can't touch the other object. It can't collide. It's not going to collide. Okay, good to know. So we've messed around with adding some objects. We've added a component to those objects. Let's start making a few simple assets. Assets are files that we'll use repeatedly throughout our game, but the asset only exists once. The asset is like the saved file that we use, and then we can drag that file into the game as many times as we want. Let's create our first asset. I'm going to right-click in the Assets folder, or I could just hit plus in the top left corner of the Assets folder, and I'm going to create a new asset. I'll create a material. So I'm going to create the material green. And now, well, right now it's white. I could click on the green material, and I can change its properties. I'm going to change it to a green material. And now I have this green asset saved. Now, as many times as I'd like, I can drag this green asset onto objects to make them green. I don't want them both to be green. I'm going to make another object. I'll make a create material. I'll make one blue. And I'll click on its property for base map, color, and I'll make it blue. And I can drag that onto my player. Now, I'm going to change this in a second, but let's say I have, multiple of these green tiles. Let's say I wanted to change the color of all of them at once. Well, they're all using right now, they're all using the same green color asset. So if I change this asset, it changes everything that's using that asset. So I could change anything colored with this all at the same time. That could be very useful. We have this one asset that affects everything that's using it. I'm going to delete these though. I was just showing us that it works for multiple objects. And I'm going to change a property on this asset really quickly. So we made some colors. I'm just going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to increase the scale by 10 on the X and 10 on the Z just to make this ground a little bit bigger. Okay. So, and if you've used Roblox, this plane kind of works like a base plate. Okay, so we have this capsule. It has physics. We created some assets. We want to be very organized when we add things to our game. I'm going to create a new folder in my assets by hitting plus and creating a folder, and I'm going to name it, I'm going to rename it to materials, and I'm going to make sure I keep my materials in my materials folder. That is great for our first Unity lesson. That's Unity Basics. We can create game objects to start decorating our map. We can create assets to, create files, basically create new components, honestly, but to create new things to attach to objects, to create new objects. We have our file system. We have our scene, which is everything in the game. Really quickly, let's look at our scenes really quickly. I have a scenes folder. A scene is one level. If I have a new scene, I can create a new scene. And now if I open this up, I'll be in a different level. If I go back, I'll be back in my level if I hit Control S. Sometimes you'll open up your Unity and you'll be in a blank scene like this and you'll be like, oh no, my work didn't save, it's deleted. Really, you're looking for your scenes. You're looking for, right now we're working in sample scene, which is the default. Your work is all saved in here. These are your levels. So we have objects in our hierarchy, which show up in our scene view. Each object in our hierarchy has components in our inspector. And we have files. All the files are saved in our assets folder in the project window. That's it for our first Unity lesson. Next time we'll probably start adding scripts to move this player around. And this isn't kosher, but I'm also going to move the input system into settings, and I'm going to move the README into settings. if someone's looking for your README, they'll be able to find it in settings, and I just like keeping things as organized as possible. And I'm honestly going to move tutorial intro into settings as well. We don't need those. Settings is where I dump all the Unity crud that I don't really use. If there's some Unity stuff that like is Unity default stuff that I don't mess with, I just throw it into settings. So this is really organized. This is great. We're going to stop the video here, and next time we'll probably add movement, I think.